Welcome to the first part of the Blazer creation lessons. In this lesson, we show how to import, identify, and organize Blazer patterns. We also cover some tips and requirements when preparing Blazer patterns specifically for 3D creation. Do note that if you are creating Blazers in VStitcher for fitting purposes, there may be limitations. The construction of the jacket is dependent on the amount of time and effort we want to put into the jacket details. In addition, there may be some limitations and differences in the jacket's construction as opposed to how it is constructed in real life. For example, in real life, certain parts of the jacket must be pressed to ease or shape it. But in 3D, this process is not applicable. There can also be limitations, especially when creating a fully constructed, full or half canvas jacket. If you are looking to fit the jacket and evaluate the balance and ease in 3D, it is still possible and may only require you to construct the shell, as would be done in the physical process. For this example, we share how to create a men's fused blazer. The next steps that we share in the Blazer lessons cover everything that's necessary, and these can be enhanced, if required, by adding more technical details to the blazer. You can follow along in the lessons by downloading the files from the Download section. Let's start by importing the patterns. We'll go to File, Import, then select the DXF file. We want to ensure that Detect Corner Points and Import DXF Turn Points are selected so as to optimize the number of corner points on the patterns, making it easier to clean up the patterns. To revisit or understand more about point optimization, watch the Import DXF lessons in the 101 Garment Creation course. Blazers are normally made of many patterns, and it can be quite confusing due to the many layers. Thus, it is important that we only export the patterns from the 2D CAD system that we need for use in VStitcher. Before we start identifying the patterns, it is important to understand what we are creating. We can look at the technical specification sheet. We are creating a fully lined jacket that has a jetted pocket with a flap. The pocket is overlapping onto the side bodice patterns. There is also a welted chest pocket with an exposed pocket square detail on the wearer's left chest. The front has a dart, and the jacket has a single vent on the center back. Now let's take a look at the inside of the jacket. This jacket is fully lined, and there is a welt pocket detail on the inside of the jacket facing. The facing and the lining are joined with the piping detail. The jacket is a fused jacket with a chest piece. This means that there should be interlining patterns to attach to the shell, as well as a chest piece to stitch on. For the lapel facing, front bodice, and collar patterns, the whole block will be fused, while the other patterns are only partially fused. All these patterns can be prepared in 2D CAD software or in VStitcher. The correct shoulder pad for our jacket construction is also added to give a better shape to the shoulder and armhole. Great! Now that we understand the design details of the garment, we should be able to identify the patterns better. Before we start, which of the options below can help to identify patterns? Is it A, turning on piece information in the 2D window, B, using the pen tool to mark our pieces when we are identifying them, or C, viewing the piece resources pane on the left as we click on the patterns? If you answered A and C, then you are correct. Let's recall how to turn on shape information in the 2D window. We click on this icon on the 2D window toolbar to turn on shape information. If the pieces' names are not showing, we go to the main menu and click View, 2D Display, Shape Options, and select Pieces Names. When preparing the patterns, it's recommended to name them so that they are easy to identify. Do note that pattern names may get transferred differently when importing patterns into VStitcher from 2D CAD software. You may need to do some trial and error in exporting from your 2D CAD software to have the right names appear in VStitcher. When preparing patterns, we also want to make sure that we import net patterns. This means that there should be no seam allowances for all the patterns, including the pocket or facing patterns. We start by identifying and organizing the shell patterns first. We select the patterns and rotate them using the gizmo tool if needed. For the shell, we have the front bodice, side bodice, and back bodice. Then the sleeves, top, and bottom. We also have the top collar and collar stand. For this jacket, we are only using the top collar. You can attempt to use both the top and bottom collars, but as a start, using just the top collar may help to improve the ease of the simulation and styling process. Additionally, if you're using just the top collar, you can remove the roll length along the edge while preparing your patterns in the 2D CAD software. Lastly, the pocket flap and chest pocket patterns. There are no patterns for jetted pockets, so we'll create those later on. You can pause the video here to spend time to identify and organize the shell patterns. We identify the lining patterns next. Remember that you can use the tech pack as reference. Another great tip is to have a screenshot of the patterns in the 2D CAD software as reference for organizing the patterns in VStitcher. We can also use guidelines in the 2D window to segment the pattern so that it is much more organized and easier to see. We enable 2D window rulers on the 2D window toolbar. Then we drag a guideline from the top of the window and position it below the shell patterns. We add one more vertical guideline to mark the center front of the jacket. We have the facing for the front bodice and 2 pieces of lining for the front bodice. When arranging the patterns, we try to place the patterns in line with the corresponding shell patterns. In this case, we align the front bodice lining and the facing below the shell patterns so that it is aligned along the y-axis. In real life, the facing normally has about 2 to 3 centimeters difference in measurement from the main shell, which would be eased in when stitched. In VStitcher, however, we recommend that you remove most of the ease when exporting your pattern for 3D to avoid puckering along the edge. In this case, the pattern was already prepared to match the shell edge measurement before importing. You can choose to remove the ease or not. The reason for this is that when constructing a jacket physically, the ease is usually pressed to remove the puckering. However, this is not possible in VStitcher, so you might need to put in more effort when styling the garment to smooth the facing. Another thing to take note for the lapel facing is the roll length. We also recommend having this taken off, but you can attempt to create the jacket without the roll length removed as well. The facing will have an inside pocket, but there are no pocket patterns created yet. We can create these later. There's a triangular flap attached to the pocket, so we place the pattern next to the facing. Then the side bodice and the back bodice lining. We also have the sleeve top and bottom patterns. You can take a moment here to identify and organizing the lining patterns in the 2D window. The last set of patterns for this blazer would be the interlining patterns, which will be fused to the bodice as well as the chest piece, shoulder pads, and sleeve wadding. In VStitcher, we add a guideline below the lining patterns and another above the shell pattern. To make it more organized, we place all the interlinings and fusing patterns, which will be attached to the main shell at the very top. Then, the interlining or fusing pattern, which will be attached to the lining, is placed below the lining patterns. We refer to the tech pack to understand where all the little pieces go and organize them in the 2D window. As with the shell and lining patterns, we align all the patterns along the y-axis, where they would be attached on the shell or facing patterns. Let's run through all those patterns to make sure we got them right. We start with the patterns which will be attached to the main shell at the top. Firstly, we have the interlining and fusing patterns for the front bodice, the interlining for the pocket flap, the side bodice fusings, the sleeve fusings for the back bodice, and collar stand. There's only one pattern which will be attached to the lining or facing, which is the lapel facing interfacing. As for the chest piece, shoulder pad, and sleeve wadding, we can place them together with the lining patterns like this. Remember that the 2D window position we have arranged is not fixed. So if there is not enough space, we can always drag down the lining patterns and the guidelines added to make more room for the chest piece, sleeve wadding, and shoulder pad. We have included in the spec sheet screenshots of the 2D windows that you can refer to. You can use this as a reference to ensure that you have all the patterns accounted for and that you have organized them correctly. We understand that this is a lot to take in, so pause here if you need to spend some time to identify and organize the leftover patterns in the 2D window. Great! We are finished identifying the patterns. Now we need to ensure we create the new patterns for the other side of the garment. We already have the left bodice, so we can create X symmetry on the patterns that require a right side, but we can leave out the interlinings and fusings, chest piece, shoulder pad, and sleeve wadding for now. Notice how the front and back shell patterns are non-symmetrical. This means that when stitching the garment, we are stitching each side independently. To make things easier, we can change the front patterns to be symmetrical. The pattern shapes are the same. The only difference is that the Where is Left bodice patterns have the chest pocket placement added. To make the pattern symmetrical, we delete the Where is Right pattern. Then create X symmetry with the Where is Left pattern. Since the right pattern should not have a chest pocket, we select the internal lines on the left pattern, then in the context view, under Line Properties, we clear the Symmetry property. Now the internal lines for the chest pocket only show on the Where is Left, but both the front patterns are still functioning as symmetrical patterns. All the main patterns are symmetrical except for the back shell patterns. When stitching, we must be careful. This is because any stitch we do on one side of the back pattern will not affect the other, so we should always check for missing stitches and manually stitch them. And we are done. Don't forget to save your file before moving to the next lesson.